It was an ordinary Friday evening for Tim Walters, the owner of the bustling Green Lotus Diner. The small restaurant had always been a labor of love for Tim. He enjoyed the smell of freshly cooked food, the clinking of dishes, and the friendly staff who felt like family. But tonight, something unexpected caught his attention. As Tim walked toward the back of the restaurant, intending to check on a delivery near the parking lot, he noticed something unusual. A small wicker basket placed by the dumpster, barely visible under the dim light. He paused, curiosity tugging at him, and as he stepped closer, he heard the faintest of cries. Tim's heart skipped a beat. He knelt down, peering into the basket, and saw a baby wrapped in a light pink blanket, her tiny face flushed and her eyes tightly shut as she whimpered. He felt his breath caught in his throat. Who could have left a baby here, alone in the dark? Without hesitation, Tim gently lifted the baby from the basket, cradling her in his arms. She was so small, so fragile, and the thought of anyone abandoning her like this broke his heart. He hurried back into the restaurant, where the waitress, Lucy, immediately noticed the bundle in his arms. "Tim, is that a baby?" she gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "Yes," Tim replied, his voice filled with urgency. "Call the authorities. We need to get her some help." Within minutes, the police and paramedics arrived. They checked the baby and assured Tim that she was stable, but they insisted on taking her to the hospital for a thorough checkup. Tim found himself unable to leave her side. He knew he had no obligation to stay, but something about the baby pulled at his heartstrings. He decided to accompany her to the hospital, wanting to make sure she was all right. At the hospital, the nurses took the baby in for tests, while Tim paced back and forth in the waiting area. He couldn't explain it, but he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the child. Maybe it was the way her tiny fingers had curled around his when he first picked her up, or the way her cries had quieted as he held her close. Whatever it was, he knew he couldn't just walk away. After what felt like hours, a doctor approached Tim, her expression a mix of concern and compassion. "Mr. Walters, the baby is stable, but there is something you should know," she began. "We've run some tests, and it appears she has a blood-borne disease. It's treatable, but she will need ongoing medical care." Tim felt his heart sink. A blood-borne disease? He looked through the glass window at the baby, now sleeping peacefully in the basket. Her tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, and he felt an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. "What happens to her now?" Tim asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She will be placed in the care of social services," the doctor replied gently. "They will find a foster home for her, and she'll receive the treatment she needs." Tim nodded, but deep down, he felt a pang of fear. What kind of life would this baby have? Would she end up in a loving home, or would she be lost in the system, shuffled from one place to another? The thought of her facing an uncertain future, especially with a medical condition, made his chest tighten. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Tim spoke up, his voice filled with determination. What if I take her? What if I adopt her?" The doctor looked at him, surprised. "Mr. Walters, adoption is a big decision. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "She will need a lot of care and support." Tim glanced at the sleeping baby, a sense of clarity washing over him. "I may not have all the answers right now, but I know I can't leave her. She deserves a chance, and I want to give that to her." The following weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, interviews, and home inspections. Tim faced countless questions from social workers, friends, and even himself. Was he really prepared for this? He was a single man with a stable but modest income from his diner. He had never imagined becoming a father, let alone under such circumstances. But every time he saw the baby, whom he had named Lily, he knew he had made the right choice. Her eyes, once filled with fear and confusion, began to sparkle with curiosity. She smiled when she saw him, reaching out with her tiny hands, and Tim felt his heart swell with love he never knew he was capable of. He learned how to care for her medical needs, administering her medication and taking her to her appointments. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the weight of his decision felt overwhelming. But then Lily would look up at him, her eyes filled with trust and love, and all his doubts would vanish. Months passed, and Lily grew stronger. Her laughter filled Tom's small apartment, turning it into a home. She learned to take her first steps, her tiny feet padding across the living room as Tim cheered her on. He took her to the park, pushing her on the swings as she giggled with delight. He read her bedtime stories, her head resting against his chest as she drifted off to sleep. One day, as Tim watched Lily playing with her toys, he realized just how much his life had changed. He had gone from a man who poured his heart into running his diner to a father whose world revolved around this little girl, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The day the adoption was finalized, Tim held Lily close, tears streaming down his face. The judge had looked at him with a smile, saying, "Congratulations, Mr. Walters. You are now officially Lily's father." It was a moment of pure joy, a moment that made every struggle, every sleepless night, and every doubt worth it. Tim knew that finding Lily behind the restaurant that night had been no coincidence. She had come into his life when he least expected it, and she had given him a purpose he never knew he needed. Years later, as Tim watched Lily run across the playground, her laughter echoing in the air, he couldn't help but feel grateful. She was healthy, happy, and full of life, a testament to the power of love and the difference one choice could make. He had found a baby in a basket, abandoned and alone, and in choosing to love her, he had found something he didn't even know he was missing: a family.